The following program is sponsored by CBN.
Coming up, the 1400-year war between the forces of Islam and the West. Raymond Ibrahim looks at the battles that changed the course of history. And a former atheist turned Christian children's author on today's 700 Club.
Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Terry's back with us. And Terry, you've been traveling the world. Tell me what you've been doing. You've been in Spain?
Spain and Amsterdam. I know you have a heart for the work that we're doing in Spain. Orphans Promise is involved in anti-trafficking projects there. It's the second or third most trafficked country in Europe.
Spain? Why?
You know, I don't know if it's because of its location. I'm not sure what it is that contributes to it, but I'm told 1 million women and children a day are used by men in some capacity every single day.
I mean, in Spain alone?
In Spain alone. Yeah.
Good grief. Well, it must be intense poverty. Well,
there is poverty. You know, I met girls in the programs that we help support there from Nigeria, from Venezuela, from Romania, who had all been brought with the promise of work and then stranded there in stories that we've all heard.
We don't think of Spain as being a center of this. This is terrible.
No, but we are connected with a powerful church in Madrid, the International Church of Madrid. And what amazing work, rescue houses and bakeries and just opportunities with the children of women who are going through this, or some of them refugee children, just to see the life that Christ brings and makes a difference.
Well, you're also in Amsterdam, because I've been there. That red light district is something else.
It is something else. And in some of these countries, you know, prostitution is legal. So it's a very weird, fine line. But there's behind the scenes work going on, kingdom work that's awesome.
Glad to have you back.
Thank you.
Well, folks, let's get into the news here. Authorities are investigating a number of suspected bombs sent to the media and Democratic politicians, including 2 former presidents. And there might be more of that to come.
Well, this morning, similar packages were sent to Vice President Joe Biden and actor Robert De Niro. As Eric Rosales reports, the nation's security agencies are on full alert.
The full-scale investigation intensifies, involving the FBI, Homeland Security, and the Secret Service. Right now, investigators are combing over the devices as President Trump condemned the attempted attacks.
The full weight of our government is being deployed to conduct this investigation and bring those responsible for these despicable acts to justice. We will spare no resources or expense in this effort.
It was chaos and confusion outside New York's Time Warner building, home to CNN, after a suspected explosive device addressed a former CIA director and critic of President Trump, John Brennan, was found in the building's mailroom. After evacuating the building, the NYPD bomb squad responded and safely removed it. Retired FBI explosive expert Tom Thurman says investigators will now scour the bombs for clues.
Wires, batteries, battery holders, switch, how the device was meant to explode.
The suspicious package was the latest in a series over the last few days. On Monday, a device was found in the mailbox of a home owned by billionaire political activist George Soros. Late Tuesday night, the Secret Service intercepted a package addressed to Hillary Clinton at her home in Westchester County, New York. Then on Wednesday morning, another device was sent to former President Barack Obama's home in Washington, D.C.
This is the world we live in. Terrorism, the attempt to spread fear, is the world that we live in.
All this comes as the nation's political discourse becomes more heated and the divisions deeper. Steve Scalise was the victim of a shooting by a Bernie Sanders supporter who opened fire on Republicans at an early morning congressional baseball practice.
We all have, our disagreements. You should never make those personal, and you should never think that violence is a way to settle our political differences. We settle them at the ballot box.
The president addressing the deep political divide in the country, seeking to tone down the discourse.
Those engaged in the political arena must stop treating political opponents as being morally defective. We should not mob people in public spaces.
But CNN's President Jeff Zucker suggested Trump is part of the problem, writing, "There is a total and complete lack of understanding at the White House about the seriousness of their continued attacks on the media." Suspicious packages were also sent to former Attorney General Eric Holder and Representative Maxine Waters' office. Authorities warn additional packages could have been sent to other locations. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
You know, what I want to see is somebody explode one of those things. There's some thought that these things actually won't go off. They won't explode. And so is it merely terrorism? I mean, they aren't really trying to explode something and hurt people? I'd like to see, you know, that bomb squad. I mean, I know they're going to take them apart and look at them, but somewhere in one of those containment areas, they ought to explode one if possible, just to see if it does explode. And I don't know if that's going to happen or not. Well,
you'd also like to see the call to civility come from both sides of the fence. I mean, it's not because one person has said something.
Maxine Waters said, when you see Republicans get in their face and scream at them, I mean, we've had mobs of people. I mean, there were those paid by a Soros affiliate down in Washington screaming at Jeff Flake during those Kavanaugh hearings. I mean, these women were plants. They were paid operatives of Soros organization screaming at a senator and claiming, you know, they were victims of sex and all this stuff. I mean, it was just, you know, a setup. Well, Vice President Mike Pence condemned threats of political violence at a campaign event at Regent University Wednesday. John Jessup has more on that.
That's right, Pat. The vice president was at Regent stumping for a local congressional candidate. And with less than 2 weeks until Election Day, the president and vice president are working hard to help the GOP keep its majority in Congress. Abigail Robertson brings us more.
Republican incumbent Scott Taylor hopes a ringing endorsement from the vice president will give him the last-minute boost he needs to beat Democratic opponent Elaine Luria and keep his seat in the House.
Virginia and America need Scott Taylor back.
Pence opened his speech at Regent University condemning the suspicious packages sent to multiple Democratic leaders like former President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton.
As the president said, acts or threats of political violence of any kind have no place in the United States of America.
He also reminded the crowd about the importance of prayer at this time.
If you bow the head and bend the knee in the next 13 days, just pray for America. Pray for all people.
Taylor said he was honored the vice president reached out to campaign for him and told CBN News even though his race is tight, he feels confident he'll be heading back to Washington.
I think tonight was a huge statement of force that shows that we have tremendous support and momentum going into the Election Day. So I feel great about it.
Taylor's seat is one of many Republicans can't afford to lose if they want to keep their House majority. Reporting from Regent University, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abby. Pat, back to you.
Well, I had the privilege of spending a nice time with the vice president, and I'm so impressed with his demeanor. He has grown in office. He is a fantastic public service, and he's a warm supporter of the president, but nevertheless, he's developing, as I say, a tremendous persona, and he is very cognizant of what's going on. We went through the list of the Senate. You know, he named a number of Senate seats that are in play. He doesn't think the Republicans will lose any. We didn't mention Nevada, but certainly not Arizona or Tennessee. And then we went down the list with him about these Senate seats, and he didn't add it up, but I've added it up. And if you look at his math of the ones that he thinks are very much in play and winnable by the Republicans, we might be seeing a Senate majority for the Republicans of an additional 4 to 5 seats, not 2, not 1, but 4 to 5. And he named a whole lot of states, and I won't go into all those in this program, but nevertheless, when you add those together, and he didn't do the math that I have, there might be a net gain as many as 5 seats in the Senate. Certainly more than the 2 they've been talking about. but this will mean a huge boost for the president in getting his cabinet approved, getting his under cabinet members approved, and certainly a whole bunch of judges. I think they're going to have what's known as a rump session after this election is over, and they'll come back into session. Mitch McConnell is going to put them through so they can approve a whole lot of more judges. And this is going to be one of the lasting legacies of President Trump. So it's a big deal. And if the vice president is right, and I have a feeling that his polling is pretty good, after the day after election, the Republicans are going to be very happy with what's happening in the Senate. We did not discuss the House races, but it looks like that blue wave is diminishing. And, and speaking of waves, before I get into this other, the strongest wind event ever to hit an American soil is building in the Pacific. It's called Hutu or Hulu. It's sustains winds up to 180, 190 miles an hour in Tinian and Saipan. Huge. Have you seen about that?
Well, I watched it on the plane on the way home.
Did you?
Coming right between Guam and really damaging.
The most intense ever to hit, and because they're considered part of America now, the American soil. Well, John, let's talk about that caravan.
Well, Pat, the migrant caravan headed here to the United States is starting to weaken. Tired, hungry, and sick, some are deciding to return home, but about 5,000 people are pressing on. Some here in America are asking questions about who they are. CBN News contributing correspondent Chuck Holton went to check it out. He caught up with the caravan in the Mexican city of Tapachula.
All right, so I want to try to clarify some of what you've been hearing in the news media about this caravan moving north into the United States. First of all, the people in this caravan are not being paid to join the caravan. Their payoff comes when they get to the U.S. They are, however, being facilitated and enabled by groups like the UN, other NGOs, and by church groups who are feeding them and providing them support on their journey north. Now, the other questions have been, are there felons, are there bad guys in this group? And I can tell you, it didn't take me long to find 4 or 5 right away who are absolute felons that are coming north to try to get back into the United States. Here's one of them.
Ha visitado, sí.
¿Cuántas veces?
4.
4 veces. Pero ¿cuánto tiempo ha pasado adentro de los Estados Unidos?
A veces 2 meses, a veces
2 meses.
Sí, a veces 1 mes. Así.
No mucho.
Sí, no mucho preso ahí. Ahí en los centros de detención.
Now, the other issue that we're seeing is people are asking about whether or not there are what you would call exotics, that is, people who are not from Central America that are joining this caravan. And let me just show you what I found a few minutes ago. Hey, Somalia! ¿Cómo están? ¿Todo bien? ¿Cuándo van a salir?
No Spanish.
Oh, no speak Spanish.
I speak English.
English. When are you going to the United States?
I don't know. When I have a chance, maybe week, day.
What are you waiting for?
We want to take some rest, we tired from the road.
I'm sorry, what?
We want to take some rest,
Oh, you want to rest a little bit. Where did you start?
I started probably Brazil,
Oh, you went all the way to Brazil and came up from Brazil? Did you walk through the Darien?
There's some road we must to walk, to cross it by walk.
Now, lastly, it bears pointing out that there are some people who are saying, this is too difficult, it's too hard, and I want to go home. And I found 2 people like that yesterday and actually helped them get back to the border of Guatemala. Take a look at what they had to say.
Look, it was really hard. There are lots of people in the group, some good, some bad. While we were all sleeping together, someone took my phone. I decided to go back because of my daughter. Carrying her while we walked, I became so tired, and the sun and everything affected us both a lot. My dream has always been to go to the United States, because it's so beautiful, to work and improve the lives of me and my family, and more than anything to give my daughter a better future.
A lot more people would probably choose to go back home if it wasn't being made easier to get to the United States by a lot of well-meaning groups who are helping these migrants. And we can know one thing for sure, and that is that there will be a lot more caravans behind this one because everybody is ready to take advantage of the infrastructure being created by this caravan. And so we have to think hard about how we're going to help these people, but also help ourselves. I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News from Tapachula, Mexico.
Thanks, Chuck, for that inside look at the caravan. Pat, back to you.
It's fascinating. You know, they say, though, that they come in and they ask, why are you coming? Well, I want a job. I want better work. I don't have enough work. Well, that isn't the reason to come in. So they're given papers which have exactly what they're supposed to say in order to beat the system. So they get these papers and they read them out and they say, oh, I'm coming because I've been persecuted. You know, the vice chairman of the Army of Honduras was here a few weeks ago. He found the Lord watching the 700 Club. He's a dedicated Christian. These aren't a bunch of monsters persecuting poor people. It just doesn't happen that way. And certainly in Guatemala, they've got, but now there's another caravan forming in Guatemala, and they want to overcome our borders. These people are being set up and financed by an organization there they call Libre. There are others that are radicals who have organized before, and they want to test and bring chaos. That's their mission, to bring chaos. And we can't let them do it. But I just believe that as they get closer to the border, we need to have at least a United States Army division down there. They want lots of troops, but we don't want them shooting people. But they want them restraining people, and they need to be put in buses and taken right back to Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, wherever they came from. If they came all the way up from Brazil, that's tough luck. We can't go down there. But nevertheless, it's got to be stopped. We cannot allow our borders to be invaded this way, and this is clearly a setup. But it's hurting whoever thought it up. They thought they would embarrass Trump. But what is happening is it's embarrassing the Democrats and emboldening Republicans to go out and vote. So, Terry,
well,
next.
I also think that when people saw that 600 were processed at the Mexican border and thousands broke down their walls and pushed through, people began to realize this is not an orderly crowd coming our way.
No,
so,
it's true.
Yeah.
And we can't allow our borders to be breached by it. We just can't do it. And you have all these Democrats who are saying, we must defend Barack Obama, Chuck Schumer, various ones saying we cannot allow our borders to be breached. Well, that's the way it is. All right, next.
Well, coming up, the true story behind the epic struggle between Christians and Muslims. Raymond Ibrahim takes us back to the beginnings of this war and shares what the future has in store for the two sides.
When President Trump said people from the Middle East are in the caravan heading for the U.S., his critics, of course, scoffed. Here he goes again. But it's not unusual for migrants from the Muslim world to go to Central America. As Gary Lane reports, some are coming to fight a centuries-old war between Islam and the West.
As a caravan of Central American migrants made its way through Mexico to the U.S. border, Guatemala announced it had captured and deported 100 ISIS members. The terrorists may have planned to infiltrate the caravan to illegally enter the United States. It's another example of the Islamic State exporting jihad beyond Iraq and Syria. Middle East analyst Raymond Ibrahim says Washington policymakers often present the public with a naive view of ISIS and Islamic terror. In his new book, The Sword and Scimitar, Ibrahim insists violent jihad is as old as Islam itself. Ibrahim provides historical context for understanding the recent Islamic resurgence and the relationship between Islam and the West. Presenting an array of facts and evidence, he proves that the contemporary conflicts and violence are nothing new.
Thanks, Gary. Author and Middle East analyst Raymond Ibrahim is with us right now. He's written a wonderful book called The Sword and Scimitar. It goes through centuries of struggle between Islam and the West. It's something I commend to you. Raymond, it's good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you again, Pat. Thanks for having me.
The Battle of Tours and the naval battle that was fought is viewed by the West as really key struggles against Islam. And your book says that the Muslims don't look at it that way.
No, they don't. The Battle of Tours here in the West, somewhat the Battle of Vienna, and Lepanto, which you were referring to, these are actually amongst the ones that are well known in the West. But if you look at the totality of Islamic jihad vis-a-vis the West and the warfare that went on, they're just drops in the bucket, and we're not even that decisive. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, is because when people talk about the historic conflict with Islam, it seems to always be limited to a couple of key battles that people are familiar with: Tours, Vienna, Lepanto. And none of those were even that, as much as what had gone on for literally a millennium or more of jihad, all in the same vein, all with the same destruction.
The Muslims here in America are trying to sell the thought that jihad is an inner struggle. Is that true?
Well, see, that's one of the things I wanted to dispel. A lot of people will do the theological argument. They'll go into the Quran, they'll go into the Hadith or the words of Muhammad, and they'll say it does mean spiritual, it doesn't mean spiritual. So what I wanted to do is say, well, let's see what Muslims have done historically. Let's not look into these abstract theologies. And what you will find is that jihad was first and foremost military conquest in the name of Islam against infidels, in this case, Christians.
You have a quote in here from Muhammad about the struggle. What does he say that they have enmity? Tell us about his words.
Well, Muhammad's, and that's the thing, when you hear all these apologetics about Muhammad, Islam is peace, then you look at his own words, and it's key to remember that almost all the criticism that Christians have had against Muhammad from the very start, from the 7th century, the century that Muhammad died in, were exclusively based on Muslim sources. So these weren't made up by, disaffected, angry Christians or Jews or whatever. It was people who looked at the Quran, looked at the biography of Muhammad, and were just scandalized by what they saw, that this man was being presented as a prophet when all he did was wage bloodshed, kill, promise a carnal paradise, and so forth.
You point out that that's the thing that drives them on, by the way, is the carnal paradise. What? I mean, they weren't just trying to have some holy war. They were trying to make out with women and get a lot of money.
Well, yeah, and it starts with Muhammad. To incite his followers. There's, for example, an anecdote where when he first tried to wage war against the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, he incited his followers by saying, "Don't you want the blonde women?" Okay, I mean, that was an incentive, an open incentive. And, and they would enslave, the things, let's put it this way, the things that ISIS, the Islamic State, or ISIL, has been doing, in which we are repeatedly told has nothing to do with Islam, enslaving and selling women and children, butchering people, crucifying them, all that has gone on for over 1,000 years on an exponential level. Okay, because it wasn't just a small, ragtag group living here and there. It was the caliphates, it was the sultanates, it was massive empires that did this on a humongous and grand scale that left undescribable destruction.
You didn't just write this yourself. You quote sources. I mean, you speak fluent Arabic.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about the Siege of Constantinople. That was the most shocking description. Now, did you get that from their sources of what they were doing?
Well, that's exactly it. You look at a lot of these history books written today by academics and so forth, they're very heavy on their own opinions and light on primary sources. And this is sort of a move that's been going on in academia where primary sources are not that much. When you look into this history and this primary source, again, especially Islamic sources, it is just, like I said, ISIS nonstop. I mean, Constantinople was continuously besieged from this beginning, from the get-go in the 600s, again, a few decades after Muhammad died. And that went on all the way until 1453 when it finally did fall.
Well, they had a wall that was impenetrable, but they began to shoot the
cannons.
Cannon.
Right.
And they only had a couple of cannons, and they kept shooting in one place in the wall.
Exactly. And it was from a Hungarian or a German, trader who just paid because the Sultan was paying a lot of money for any kind of technology to help finally breach the walls of Constantinople, which had stood for well over 1,000 years.
When they got through the wall, they breached it and began to run it. What did the Muslim do, and where are your sources? I mean, it's horrible what you were writing about.
The sources that I use are exclusively primary in this context. I use most of them were eyewitness. The good thing about the sack of Constantinople in 1453 is it's not as far as the earlier battles in the 7th and 8th century, so we actually have a lot of good documentation. And I quote prolifically from eyewitnesses and including from Ottoman chronicles. And what happened once they went in there is just, it's an apocalypse. The people that were murdered and slaughtered, forced into, it says, engaging in obscene, sexual things, and all the nuns were taken and raped, sometimes, gang raped. One of the archdukes of Constantinople, second to the emperor herself, they took his daughter into the Hagia Sophia, put a cross behind her head, and actually gang raped her continuously. And the same thing happened just all throughout. It was absolute terror.
A Christian girl, they put a cross behind her head and gang raped her?
As mockery. And then, of course, the siege. As mockery, to mock her, to mock the cross and her. And they completely, it's just, and yet here's the problem. When you read about these things from a nice, sophisticated secondary historian of academic pedigree and so forth, it'll pretend as if, the Muslims came and just after a little war, and it's just a war between two secular powers, they took over and everything was okay. But again, like I said, when you read the sources, think of what the Islamic State is doing, but multiply it by 1,000. And that's how horrific it is.
In Constantinople, they were raping boys.
Raping boys. They used to, even before that, there was the Janissary system, which the Ottoman empires and other Islamic empires before them, what they would do is, in the conquered Christian populations, they would go in and get the finest boys, the strongest, the healthiest, the handsomest, the smartest. They would take them, indoctrinate and force them into Islam, and then turn them into jihadis. And they would be so indoctrinated that they would then unloose them back on their former families, Christians, to perpetuate the cycle. They would go kill and destroy and seize more young boys. And so it was even a demographic jihad. But today, this is portrayed as a wonderful, some scholars and academics portrayed as an equivalent of a Harvard scholarship. Because, hey, look, these were poor peasant Christians. The Ottomans took their children and gave them a great life and made them prosperous by turning them into this. So it's always,
George Bush, I said he was not chosen to be the chief theologian. He was the chief political man. But he came out so strong and said, Islam is a religion of peace. Was he misled? What do you think?
People like that, they are either really ignorant or intentionally being deceiving, when they say things like that. Because anyone who is familiar with the history is documented in the book, 14 centuries, and they're all unwavering. There's nothing, anytime there was an Islamic power adjacent to a non-Islamic power, and the book focuses on Christians in Europe, it was jihad. The only times you had peace is when the Islamic power was weak at the time. And then they sued for peace and wanted friendship and, extended the olive branch and so forth. But once the circumstance allowed them to go on the offensive, always, 100%, it happened.
You think are they trying to get America?
Oh, of course. There's an interesting anecdote in the book where, even when America was discovered in the late 15th century, you have Ottomans saying, "Oh, we've heard of this new land, and we can't wait until the light of Islam opens it." Opens in Arabic and Islamic languages means conquers. It's a euphemism.
Well, I understand that Marco Polo and some of the others were trying, and of course, the sea routes to America, Columbus and others, did that because the Muslims had cut the Silk Road and they couldn't trade.
Absolutely. And this is, again, another way of how our education system doesn't bring these points out. We think the story is Columbus just decided he wanted to go and prove the world's not round or find a spice trade or whatever. You look into the actual sources of what Columbus said. This was a crusade, and his first and foremost intention and goal was actually liberate Jerusalem from Muslim armies, in conjunction with Queen Isabella and the Spanish crown, who were very staunch crusaders. And then you look at his letters, repeatedly, that's what comes out. He's going there, to circumvent the Mediterranean, which was just an Islamic terror zone. No Western vessel could sail without becoming killed or enslaved. So it was to do that, but it was also to try to go back and reclaim Jerusalem to the Christian world because right before that also was the sting of the fall of Constantinople in 1453. And then in 1492, finally, the Spanish monarchy expelled all of Islam after 700 years.
Again, you pointed out very clearly that apparently the Christian nations couldn't come together, France and England and Germany and these states.
Right, and it's the sort of thing we still see today. It has echoes all the way back. And much of it really, for the Catholics and the Orthodox, you had some problems with them. Then the Protestant Reformation came, and there was a complete, Martin Luther for all that he's done. That's well. Most people don't understand that, with his rise, there was a sort of new sympathy towards Islam because the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. And, so I'm not talking about what Martin Luther did theologically. I'm just saying as a man in his time with the vicissitudes of history created a lot of problems. And it helped actually lead up to things like the Siege of Vienna. Martin Luther said when the Muslims were coming that, so what if the Sultan's killing Christians? By doing that, he's just sending to heaven. Why resist it? And things of
Martin
that sort.
Luther said that?
Yeah, Martin Luther said that.
Oh, dear. All right.
Initially, he later, back when they got close to Vienna, he backtracked.
It's been said that, and I've said it, that Islam is not really a religion. It is a worldwide political force. Now, is that overstating it? Or
No. If you look at the origins and the roots and what Muhammad taught and what Muhammad said, Islam was basically a system that was created to validate some of the worst human impulses and vices, okay? For, rape, enslavement, plundering people, and basically treating the other like dirt. And it was very much what Muhammad did is he took the tribal mores of his own society. And tribalism is essentially, we are the humans, you're animals, and we can do anything to you. That's tribalism before Islam. What he did is he deified it. And he said, we are now not just the tribe, we are the tribe of Islam, which is the Ummah. And everyone else, the infidels, are the other tribe. And so it is our duty to they are free reign for us. Plunder them, kill them, enslave them. And then he added to it a bonus. And he deified it. So now instead of the risk that comes in going on a raid and maybe getting killed, well, if you get killed, you get even more rewards in the hereafter, including, again, carnal things, 72 supernatural women who will perpetually gratify the slain and so forth. And today people laugh at that and they can't fathom that anyone thought that, but they really did think that. It comes out everywhere, both in Islamic and non-Islamic sources, of fervor and zeal that came out from this sort of win-win bargain.
Well, what about, can there be Muslims who don't believe in any of that? Can there be a good Muslim who doesn't go along with Muhammad?
Sure. I mean, just like there can be a Christian who believes in 10, 20 things that, counter what Christ taught, I mean, he can say that and he believes as a Christian, okay. So I believe you can have that Muslim. But if a Muslim wants to follow Islam, follow the Quran, follow the teachings, Sharia, Islamic law, and implement, history, well, he's going to become like ISIS. I mean, these guys a lot of people don't understand that ISIS, some of the things that they would say to the West, for example, they would say, American blood is sweetest, and we've tasted it, and we want more. Nobody understood that they were actually quoting a guy in the first chapter in this book, an Islamic guy known as the Sword of Allah, who said that to the Byzantines. He said, Greek blood is the tastiest, and we've come here to shed it and taste it. So my point is, so many Muslims are aware of the continuity of their history, and they seek to emulate it and reenact it here, whereas us, we don't get it at all. We just think these are just words they came up with to be scary or something like that, and it's not. That they're trying to relive those over 1 millennium of nonstop jihad.
What ISIS was doing was actually a fulfillment of Muhammad. All this business of slaving women.
I mean, Muhammad had sex slaves and concubines and just slaves in general. Muhammad tortured people just to find out where they hid their treasure and burned people alive. I mean, if that's not ISIS-like, what is?
He did that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in one group of, I believe, Jews, he attacked them and they had hidden treasure, but they didn't want to confess, and he had them slowly tortured, including with fire, just to find out where the treasure is.
And your sources of this, again?
Islamic sources, many in Arabic, many I translated for the first time because a lot of people don't like to translate this. Either they don't know or they don't want to because it's pretty unpopular, obviously. Yeah.
Well, do people try to kill you?
All the time.
Do they really? Seriously?
Well, I mean, I get the threats and the hate mail, but thankfully I get a lot more positive email, from less radical types.
This is an incredible book. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to be aware of this. Are we under attack? I mean, we in the West, for example, Great Britain, there are Sharia courts now in the middle of Great Britain.
And here's the thing, when you look at the history, you'll see Muslims. Okay, a thing that needs to be understood, again, from a historical point of view, what we today call the West, okay, which is basically Europe and then later America and so forth, is really the westernmost appendage of a much larger Christian organic civilization that Islam totally severed and conquered. Those lands that we today casually call the Muslim world, from Egypt, all of North Africa, Syria, Turkey, or Anatolia, all of that was actually the heart of the Christian world in the 7th century, more than Europe. Okay, and people forget that, and that's where so much of the theology was articulated and so forth. Then Islam in 1 century completely conquered them, Arabized them, so they are what they are now. And then Europe was that last part that was in the Northwest. It was a Northwest appendage of that Christian part, and it became, the last bastion of unconquered Christianity. And if you ever think the Crusaders were militant, well, they had to be to exist. If they weren't, we wouldn't be here. Western Christians would not be here today for all their faults if they hadn't done that, because it was a nonstop bombardment, century after century, chipping away, taking Spain for 700 years, going all the way deep into France. People don't know Muslim raids reached Iceland and Denmark, and they enslaved people because they had a penchant for, fair-haired women who sold the most in the markets of Algiers. And the same thing, the Ottomans all the way, they took the Balkans up until Vienna. So there's even a map in there. If you look at it, I show all the areas that were Christian, that were permanently conquered, and areas that were temporarily conquered, and areas that were sieged. And basically the whole map of Europe is dark. But what do we hear? We hear about colonialism. We hear about the Crusades. The Crusades always come out in a vacuum, as if 400 years before the Crusades, and they say this, academics like John Esposito and Karen Armstrong, they say before the Crusades, everything was fine between Christian and Muslims. Actually, as this book shows, before the Crusades, Muslims were slaughtering literally hundreds of thousands of Christians in the Eastern Empire.
Well, you look at Turkey, for example. I mean, that they call it the Middle East, but I mean, the churches of Asia.
That's the oldest spot.
All in Turkey.
The original Christian churches, Revelation, and Paul wrote letters to. And that's the thing. So today, when we think of history, Turkey's an Arab or a Muslim country, Egypt, North Africa, it wasn't like that. Now, if those deeply, deeply profound Christian nations could become so Islamic today, well, it could happen to Europe too, especially when Europe is going out of its way to capitulate. As you said, in England, they have all these mosques. And I just heard there's a new report that says there's now 42% of all children under a certain age in Germany are Muslim. I mean, it's at least those people in Europe fought back and, tried to preserve their way of life and Christian heritage. Now there's a movement to just, actually capitulate as fast as possible.
What's your take finally? Are we going to win it? I think we are, aren't we?
We are?
Are we going to win or not?
Well, it depends on God's plans ultimately, but I hope eventually we'll win. Goodness always wins. Righteousness will win. But I think one of the double problem we're dealing with, and this has always happened, including in the book historically, on the one hand you have Islam, which is a physical force that destroys the Christian body. On the other hand, you have forces and elements have wormed their way into the Christian body, weakening it and, making it, as I was saying, capitulate and softening it, making them think that the beginning and the end of all Christian doctrine is to forgive and to be tolerant and to be a doormat. And that only, of course, helps, but that's not what Christ taught.
Raymond, this is a fabulous book, and thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, if that didn't scare the daylights out of you, I don't know what would. But we don't want to be under the sword of Islam. We don't want to be dhimmis. We don't want to be enslaved. But their forces, it's either the world of war or the world of Islam. That's what they say, Dar al-Islam, Dar al-Harb. That's the way it is. That's what they believe. This book is available wherever books are sold, called The Sword and Scimitar. Raymond Abraham. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much, Pat. It's an honor.
All right. Whew, Terry, are you scared?
Well, I'm not scared, but I'm going to get the book. Well, still ahead, it's the inspirational series that's helping girls discover the powerful voices given to them by God. The founder of the Bible Bells introduces us to the heroine of her latest story when we come back.
Welcome back to the 700 Club. The state of Oregon is dismissing charges against a judge who says he was targeted for his Christian beliefs. Those charges against Judge Vance Day stem from his interactions with a Navy SEAL who was a convicted felon. Day was accused of allowing the SEAL to possess and control guns. He argued the charges were politically motivated because of his unwillingness to perform gay marriages. The charges were dropped because a key witness refused to testify at his trial. Well, some disturbing news to report. 2 middle schoolers from Central Florida are accused of plotting to kill and mutilate fellow classmates. WTVT Fox 13 reports police say the girls had written plans detailing how they would kill and dismember fellow students in the school bathroom. They brought scissors, knives, and even a pizza cutter to school. Police say the pair admitted their plans and acknowledged they worshiped the devil. The girls also planned to drink the blood of their victims and to commit suicide to, quote, be with Satan. Both the 11 and 12-year-old are in custody and facing several charges. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com. Pat and Terry will be back with more of the 700 Club right after this.
Well, one day, Erin Weideman was looking for a birthday present for her niece, Hannah. She didn't want to buy her another toy, so instead, Erin wrote a book, and the Bible Bells series was born. The book written for Hannah is now part of a multimedia empire, all penned by a former atheist.
In 2006, Erin Weideman was a self-proclaimed atheist when she got the shock of a lifetime. Erin, an avid athlete, had cancer. When a powerful radiation treatment quarantined her, she hit her knees, asking God for help. Erin battled cancer 4 more times in the last 11 years.
I asked God, if I'm not going to live very long, what would you have me do?
Now, Erin finds meaning by helping young girls find true beauty through her popular book and devotional series, Bible Bells.
Erin Weideman is here with us again, and we welcome you back to the 700 Club.
Thanks so much for having me, Terry.
Before we talk about the series, just give us an update on your health. This battle that you've done with cancer has happened over a 10-year period. Where are you at today?
I am 6 years cancer-free, and God is amazing, and it's just blessed me abundantly, so excited to be here.
Boy, are we glad. Well, your recent entry into this whole series of Bible Bells has been started out with Hannah. The recent one is
Deborah.
Deborah. Mm-hmm. Why Deborah? Why did you decide to do her?
So we chose 5 women for the first series because we really wanted to take girls on a journey that tackled 5 areas of key spiritual growth. So we started with Hannah, went to Esther, Abigail, Ruth, and now Deborah. Wow. And we wanted to lead girls to help them understand that God's created a unique leadership opportunity for them. And how do we embolden girls to step into that leadership role, understanding that He's equipped them with the giftings and talents and the resources they need to build His kingdom on earth. That's why Deborah was a logical choice to end the series, because she is such a great example of not just having the wisdom to know what needs to be done, but how to influence and stir the people around you to action.
Boy, in the #MeToo culture that we live in, what you're talking about in wisdom and discernment is so significant, because things can get out of control. It all starts well, but it doesn't always all end well. So those are the attributes you want a girl who reads the story about and takes a look at the life of Deborah to come away from. But you mentioned the end. It's not the end. it's the end of the Old Testament, right? And
yes.
What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, so the Herd series, like I said, was really born out of just desiring to help parents and grandparents access these stories as a way to connect girls to Scripture, to help them understand you were made by God for a purpose and to be excited to step into that purpose. But if the Herd series helps girls realize, God has equipped me with this powerful voice, the next series is going to help them understand what is the message, the answer to the question, what is the message I'm called to bring to the world? So I'm excited to highlight New Testament women as a way to champion Jesus for a culture that desperately needs Him.
During the commercials when Erin and I were talking, and she mentioned this whole new series coming up, you made a statement that I think is so powerful, that we are not any of us, not our children, not us, supposed to live in the comfort of our own salvation. There is a purpose to what we're called to.
Yeah, I think too, you think about salvation, and it's not this bubble bath. When you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, the word baptism even comes from the word to dunk.
Yes.
So it's this idea of we're called to get up and go, and God wants us to say yes to the opportunities He is presenting to us to build His kingdom and to usher in His glory, not just by telling people about Him, but stirring up a culture and changing the world, making a difference in people's lives, and sharing sharing things like love and through our passionate service to really come alongside people and reflect the glory of the Lord. So,
and the time to plant that seed and to nurture it is when kids are young. I love that you have added a devotional to this. Talk about that a little bit.
I wanted to give parents and grandparents a way to teach through the women of the Bible in a way that really made sense, was easy to pick up. It's got, games and activities and memory verses. It's so much more than a devotional. It's a way for the adults in the lives of kids can come alongside them and say, we're going to work through these stories in a way that is going to connect with your own life, what you're going through, your struggles as a girl, reflect the struggles of these women and look at how they reacted to them. Look at how God showed up in the lives of these women, and he can do the same for you.
Sometimes we think our children are too young to understand, like a biblical mandate on a life, a biblical call to something. You've got not just the devotional, but I love the fact that you have a coloring book, because I have a 6-year-old granddaughter that lives with me, and she loves to color. So you're meeting them right where they're at. What's the age bracket for this?
So pre-readers, 4 and 5, all the way to 9 and 10-year-olds can easily read it on their own. We really wanted to give parents and grandparents a tool and a resource to hit them, right pre-middle school, before they get into that time where they're struggling with things like insecurity, their confidence is shaken by all sorts of social issues. Technology, plays a weird role in the development of young people. So really that 4 to 10-year-old age bracket where you're coming alongside a young girl, pouring straight into her identity. You're not afraid to talk about things like, what does God say about beauty? What does God say about your purpose? How does God want to walk this life alongside you? And where are the places and path where you can step into what he's calling you to do?
Because you found in middle school that there were some real struggles that all girls were going through, and planting this ahead of time really helps hit that head on.
Yeah, I think it just broke my heart. I taught middle school for such a long time and just watched girls struggle with things like friendships, getting to school and not knowing who your friend is that day, and the social media component is so difficult for kids nowadays to navigate, and they're really looking for a guiding force in their life. They're so hungry for this connection with the Lord and understanding this calling. I mean, it's this void that we know as adults we sometimes try to fill in our 20s and 30s and 40s. And if we can tap into that for girls and help them realize, God's got this path carved out for them. Let's go find it together. It's so exciting.
So what do you say to parents?
I think there's nobody more qualified to parent your child. You are uniquely gifted with tools and resources and everything you've got in terms of your personality, your life experience, your own faith walk. You are the person who's supposed to parent that child. God did it on purpose, and he's going to walk with you every step of the way. But you do need resources, and that's where we come in.
Well, Erin, thank you for being with us and for these resources. If you want to encourage a young girl in your life, check out the Bible Bell series. Started with Hannah. There are 5 now here, but more coming. Deborah, the Bell of Leadership, is the latest. And don't forget about the devotional inspired by the series. It's called Heard, full of voices and verses and encouragement for girls. You can also find out how to get copies by going to our website. That's cbn.com. Great coloring book. Talk to your girls. Talk to your girls about who they are in Christ. Bless you. Thank you so much. Great to have you with us again, Erin. Pat, over to you.
Thanks, Terry. Well, we leave you folks with today's Power Minute from the Psalms. You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing. Well, tomorrow, a young man is shot in the face, and he lives to tell about it. There's a remarkable healing miracle on tomorrow's program. You don't want to miss it. For Terry and all of us, this is Pat Robertson. Thank you for being with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the 700 Club tomorrow. Bye-bye.